have, happy to help. So before I get into the tool, just a little bit, just a 10,000-foot view of my backstory at Stanford. I'll give you a quick 30-second blurb of all 4 years. I came in as a very confident freshman. I was very excited about the recruiting class. I came in with the Lopez twins. If any of you knew about that then, the Pac-10 at that time, not the Pac-12, was really starting to take off. Teams were really good. Arizona, UCLA, USC, even Washington State at that point in time was really doing well in the Pac. And like many players, like many of us who have gone through school, there's that point in time where you hit the wall, you face a little bit of adversity, and you kind of enter this pit stage. And that was no different for me. I went through that. And by the grace of God and a surrounding community around me, I was able to climb out of that pit. There was a brand new opportunity for me coming into my junior season where we had a coaching change. I was able to get on the floor a little bit more because the seniors had graduated, and then that propelled me into my senior year, which was really like a breakout year and sort of was the launch pad for my ultimate trajectory into the NBA and beyond. So I tell you all that, one, because it's going to help sort of bolster up this tool. I'm going to be reverting back to it time and time again. But I also tell you that because my journey, just statistically speaking, is completely atypical. Players making the NBA is an astronomical feat. And I don't say that as one like, hey, look at me, because there's so much that happens outside of me that had to go right in order for me to make it. But if you're just looking at the stats, only 0.03% of all high school basketball players are going to make the NBA. And if they're fortunate enough to go to college, only 1.2% of those basketball players are going to make the NBA. So this tool, the beauty of this tool is it's going to address not just your NBA players if you happen to coach those guys, but also your college players. The guy that's the gal or the guy that's last on the bench. This tool directly applies to them. So without sort of further ado, let's get into this tool. So this tool is known as the development square. You guys can really get on my handwriting. Make sure I spell everything correctly for Stanford. So if any of you are kind of nerdy like me, you're going to see a lot of undertones to what this gentleman's name. His name is Joseph Campbell, and he was able to identify a pattern out in reality, which is called the hero's journey. So as I'm going through this, you might see some of that if you happen to know who that is. So I'm not trying to steal any content here, but this is sort of an adaptation of it. So when we're going in to learn anything new, whether, like I said, riding the bike, learning to play basketball, what you're going to see most of all from your freshmen or your rookies or those first-year guys that come into the league, they're going to hit stage one. And stage one is known as unconscious incompetence. Before we do anything new, before we set out on a brand new journey, there is always a level of excitement for what could be, for what the vision is, for what the ideal is for that next stage of our life, for that next stage of our development. I don't know if any of you have kids, but this is the reason why a lot of people have kids. They get in love, they fall in love with the excitement of what it's going to be like to have kids. If you're a guy, you want to put the basketball in your young son's hand early on. You have this vision for their life because really, it's not really about them. It's about you living through them. If you're taking a brand new job offer, if you're moving from Toronto to Phoenix and you have this new opportunity in front of you, I would imagine that you took that job because there's a great level of excitement for what could be. Players come to your programs from their high school programs to their college programs because they're excited about continuing not only their education, but their basketball career and hopefully beyond, whether it's the NBA or they're playing pro ball overseas. You see, it is our excitement for the ideal, which is what gets us to actually uproot and do something new. Otherwise, we actually wouldn't do anything. If there wasn't a level of excitement for something new, we wouldn't do anything. So it's in this stage where we have sort of a blind confidence. For me, and I kid you not, this is a true story. What encapsulates this perfectly is before going into my freshman year, I knew that I was going to come alongside the Lopez twins, who are now playing for the Milwaukee Bucks. And I kid you not, I had a vision of us on the cover of either a Slam magazine or Sports Illustrated, where I'm sitting there in my Stanford Cardinal jersey with a big smile on my face, holding a basketball, and then them in the background in suits and like these Secret Service glasses with a caption at the bottom saying, "Stanford freshmen take the Pac-10 by storm." Like, that's the vision that I had going into Stanford. I thought that that's what we, partnering with the Lopez twins, were ultimately going to do. Now, when the rubber meets the road and you actually get on campus, things do change. But this first stage can be summed up like this: we don't know what we don't know. Unconscious incompetence, stage one, the excitement that we get before we actually enter into the journey, is we don't know what we don't know. And what happens is we get to this point where there's a fall. Now, back to some of those examples. When we actually have kids, if any of you have kids, you understand that it didn't matter how many books you read, no matter how many people you spoke to before having those children, the moment they came into the world, everything changed, and your vision of what that was going to be like was completely disrupted. When I had my oldest son, JJ, who's 6 years old right now, I kid you not, we took him home for the first week. My wife went to go take a nap because she just had a baby. So please, babe, go ahead. But I sat there for 5 minutes wondering if I needed to take him to the bathroom with me because I couldn't leave him alone. I didn't understand if that was something that was going to be sort of parent abuse or whatnot. But these thoughts, legitimately, for 5 minutes, I had no idea what I was going to do with that. I didn't take him there, so don't worry about that. It's this, when you finally enter into a new job and you're seeing the different dynamics at play, you're starting to meet people that you had no idea were going to be a part of that job. There's part of your job description that you had no idea was going to be this difficult to actually do what the job is requiring at that point in time. It's what happens with players when they get on campus and all of a sudden they're in brand new classes. Their teammates are no longer in official visit mode. They're not just kind of letting you coast. They're now getting down and dirty and getting real with you. You're living on your own for the first time. That was a huge one for me, living away from home for the first time. And then all you coaches out there, if you're college coaches, you take off your, guys or ladies, if you're college coaches, you take off your recruiting hats and then you put on your real coaching hat. And there's like this different dynamic where the first one was a salesman, but now here you are, the real coach behind the big smile for the parents when you're in the homes. Like, I caught on to that quickly. Very quickly, I realized that my vision of me and the Lopez twins in the Slam magazine or the Sports Illustrated, it's probably never going to happen. It's probably never going to happen. This is the point where the player's idealism of what could be quickly becomes realism. And the fall can be summed up like this: we know what we don't know. We went from unconscious incompetence, we don't know what we don't know, now to we know what we don't know. And what happens is we have the fall. And what happens with the fall, we fall into, and I am not an artist, we fall into what's known as the pit. Now, the pit here, this is stage 2 of the developmental journey. And stage 2 is defined as conscious incompetence. Again, we now know what we don't know. When we land here, when we finally get on campus, when your players finally see what the real is, the brightness of their North Stars can quickly diminish. You see this even in the G League. Guys get drafted. or they don't get drafted, but they're one of the exhibit 10s, or they're two ways and they hit the G League and they think, you know what, I was this close to getting drafted, so got to be a cakewalk. G League has got some real players in it, some real talented dudes, and they understand that, wow, this is going to be a lot harder to achieve my ultimate dream than I thought it would. What happens is when we fall into the pit of our developmental journey, it can feel lonely. You can start feeling regret for actually making the decision to journey out of the cave that you once were in. And most of all, it can feel very disorienting. When we or your players feel lonely, regret, and disoriented, they are plagued by three temptations. Here are the three temptations. Here's the first one. The first one is they are tempted to quit. Now, this probably, if you're at the college level and you have freshmen, this is probably the least likely temptation. You don't necessarily see guys come in and be like, well, this is harder than I thought, I'm out. No, like they do give it some time. You see this more so in older players where they realize, like, you know what, probably not going to be a pro, probably not going to be an NBA player. I'm just going to take my focus and go over here to whatever my studies are. You know what? That's totally fine. There's no knock against that. This is just right here a matter of fact of what players do when they enter that pit stage of their developmental journey. This is when you find out who really loves basketball and who doesn't when it comes down to it. The second temptation is to become stagnant. Stagnation. A lot of times you'll see this in freshmen early on, rookies early on. They're in the pit. Things are not going how they wanted it to go. And all of a sudden they just start to coast. You start to see them, they show up. They're doing sort of the bare minimum. There's no extra work. They're not overly involved with their teammates outside of the basketball setting. They're kind of in this depressive state, just kind of coasting along. It's really difficult. You'd almost wish guys, especially if they're older in college, that they would just kind of hang it up and quit. Because when you have those players that aren't necessarily hot, they're not necessarily cold, they're just sort of lukewarm, they're just kind of muddying the waters a little bit. You're just like, come on, guy, either get with it or get out. Like that's sort of the deal when you hit this stagnation for some of these players. And now the third temptation, which all of you are probably very, very familiar with. The temptation is to transfer. There have been 2,087 transfers in collegiate basketball, D1 basketball, over the last 3 years. That's an average of 696 transfers per year. This is the mindset that, oh, the grass is greener on the other side. What's getting me here, right now is not getting it done. But you know what? That program over there, that's the program that I'm going to go to. Now, there's no knock because sometimes there are very legitimate reasons for transferring. You see this with grad transfers. You see this with coaching changes and whatnot. But for a majority of players, a lot of times it's just you hit that pit stage. Things aren't necessarily working out how you wanted them to do, how you wanted them to go. So you know what? I'm going to hit the abort button. I'm going to go to this program over here. And I'm not necessarily judging players because I went through this same temptation. This was my temptation after my first year. When I got into the classroom, I was living alone. I remember calling my dad a few times being like, Dad, I'm going to transfer. I can't stand it here. The coach is much different than he was on the recruiting visit. I have to live with somebody at Stanford. You kind of get treated like just a normal student. Oh, God forbid. So my confidence was shook, but thankfully my dad, he reminded me how hard it was for me to actually get into Stanford and the work that I had to put in to get there. And that kind of calmed me down and gave me a little bit more vision. You see, when we or your players are in this pit, they're always looking for the nearest exit sign. It's one of these three temptations, and I'm sure you might be able to see it in your players right away. But here's sort of the hope behind it. This is where we as leaders and as coaches, now this is where we get to work. This is sort of where the fun begins. Because as guides, the pit is actually where we want all of our players to eventually go for their ultimate individual benefit and also for the team's ultimate success in the long run. You see, when players hit the pit, they are humbled. They're most willing to change. And it's that perfect time for you to now implement them or indoctrinate them into the system and the culture that you see best fit for your program. Sometimes it takes a little bit of a nudge to get them in the pit, and sometimes they just fall straight on their face. But this is a point where, yes, it's going to get difficult. It's going to be hard. But we as coaches and we as leaders and we as guides are here to help you get out of the pit, learn all you can first, and then get out. But this is very hard for players, especially nowadays, because players have huge egos, and we all have egos. And I'm not knocking ego, because ego is what has been able to help us navigate throughout life in a number of circumstances. Ego is just the story that you're telling yourself about yourself consistently and constantly to yourself. And this is what players are doing. And it does not help that the culture in which we live in, as in scouting, we see this all the time. Everybody is Insta famous. Everyone is telling these players, hey, you're awesome. You're the guy. I've got hundreds of thousands of followers, on my way to 1 million. I mean, when you get that overinflated ego, that is very, very difficult on players when they hit this pit and they realize, hey, you just aren't as good or as talented or where you think you're at this stage of your career, of your basketball journey. You see, when they enter the pit, it's our opportunity to tell them, like, hey, you can't change what you can't see. Here in the pit, now you're getting this vision to see clearly who you are, not only as a player, but maybe even as a person. See, humility is one of the greatest pillars we have in San Antonio. It's something that when we're doing our scouting, that's one of the very first things that we look for. See, when players are in this stage of the pit, we as leaders, we have to do 3 things. We have to cultivate 3 things for these players, okay? The first thing is, as I just mentioned, humility. You cannot change what you can't see. Sometimes the message goes like this, like, no, player, you're not as good today as you will be tomorrow. What got you here to this program is not going to take us there as a team, and it's not going to get you where you want to be ultimately in the long run. And like I said, this is very, very hard for players. Humility is hard for anybody. It's swallowing your pride, looking yourself in the mirror, and being like, yeah, there's some warts there. There's some blemishes, and I need to do all I can to get rid of them and grow through this process. The second thing we need to do when players hit the pit is we need to cultivate hunger. And what I mean by cultivating hunger, we need to cultivate hunger for a new vision or a sort of redefined vision. So for some of your players, they have visions of being NBA players, and that's completely fine. I don't think you necessarily want to mess with that at all. But what we need to do is we need to cultivate hunger for a different pathway, not a different vision. You see, because what ultimately is going to get them to where they want to go is a completely different pathway than what they set out for. They come out and they think it's going to be like this. I'm in college, boom, I'm in the NBA. When in reality, and you might have seen this meme before, it looks something like this. I might make the NBA at that point in time. You see, a month into my freshman year at Stanford, I knew at that point in time that I was going to be a 4-year player. For me personally, my potential stumbling blocks was not necessarily the vision, it was the pathway. That was what was going to stumble me that was what I was going to stumble over if I was going to not achieve my vision of being an NBA player. And the same is true for most players. We all want to achieve our goals as fast and efficient as possible. You as coaches, you have big dreams of coaching beyond where you're at. I'm absolutely sure of that. And you should be. We should have that ambition. Players should have that ambitious drive to be the best they can be. But we need to tailor it, refine it, and put it in a controlled setting for these players for them to ultimately succeed. And the third thing, number 3, is hard work. Now, these aren't mind-blowing things that we have to cultivate, but they're simple and they're easy. And these are the things that we have to do. Now, with hard work at the Spurs, we have a great line. It's called Pound the Rock. And Pound the Rock is nothing new. It's nothing novel. Most everybody in the basketball world has heard it before, but if you haven't, this is how we define hard work. We define hard work by looking at stone cutters. So if anybody knows anything about a stone cutter is one of those guys that goes and they take these huge boulders, just enormous rocks, and their job is to crack that thing down to a bunch of pieces so they can use the rocks for a number of different things. So what happens is if you're looking at a stone cutter, you're seeing them hitting the rock over and over again. Boom, 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 98, 99, 100. And on that 100th blow, that's when the entire stone cracks. But the wisdom of the stone cutter and where Pound the Rock come from, the wisdom is this. The wisdom is the stone cutter knows that it's not the 100th blow that made the rock crack. It is all the 99 hits that came before it. That is what it means by hard work. It's the day in and day out mundane nature of getting in the gym, not necessarily seeing the fruit of your labor a week in, 2 weeks in, a month in, maybe not even a year in. Some players don't play for the first few years of their college career, then ultimately become the NBA players. But what they understood is that they have to overuse a cliche phrase in the basketball world, they have to trust the process. They have to know that the work they're putting in today when nobody is watching, that's going into ultimately cracking that huge boulder of a vision that they want to ultimately achieve. Now, the thing about these three things, humility, hunger, and hard work, you can have all the humility and all the honesty in the world. You can have all the hunger and the drive in the world. But if you don't have hard work, if you don't put the action behind the intangibles, it means absolutely nothing. And then on the flip side, if all you're doing is acting out, getting in the gym, and you have no vision of where you want to go, if you have no humility and you're not working on the things that you know you should be working on, if you're not addressing that blemish that's right on your cheek, that thing's going to stand out and it's never going to change. That's why you can only change what you can see. I believe this is what John Wooden was talking about when he said, never mistake activity for achievement. I always took that as just because you're in the gym, that doesn't necessarily mean you're getting any better. If you're not having a hard look in the mirror and really getting down to the fine tuning of where you need to get better and addressing that honestly and with humility, then you're not going to get anywhere. So right there, what I want to do is I want to quickly stop because that's probably a lot. I want you all to just kind of take a minute, 30 seconds to a minute. Think about your previous season. If you were coaching this past season, think about your own life. Think about anything you want. And I want you to write down somebody or a player that you can identify was in the pit stage of their developmental journey. So just quick break here, take 30 seconds. And then if there's anything that needs clarification, this is the time to write that down as well. Okay. Okay, so when players are in the pit, the thing about leadership is we have to go to where they're at. This is something that we're trying to preach and instill in Austin, is players are on separate islands. We're on this Spurs island. And the mistake that we can make is we can pull out that big megaphone and say, hey, such and such player, this is the island you want to be on. Build a bridge and come over here. That's not how leadership works. That's not how we at the Spurs want to approach leadership by any capacity. You see, what we do and what we try to preach is we have to be the ones to build a bridge over to every single island, have us as the coaches, as the staff, as the managers, walk over those bridges, put our arms around our players, build trust and relationship, and then carefully and steadily and surely walk them from their island over the bridge that we set out onto the Spurs island to help them become the Spurs or the DNA that we see in them to ultimately achieve a long tenure of an NBA career. And for many coaches, and what we can see in the NBA and even beyond, is that this is where a lot of leaders they fall short. is because there's a deep humility that we as leaders and we as coaches, we have to have with players. A lot of times we get on power trips or we get on we become cursed by our expertise. And we're just, you're like, why aren't you getting this? Why don't you just come over here? Quick, just follow me. That's not the pathway here. Because even if you get a player to do that, you will crush the relationship in the process. And in the NBA, if you're crushing relationships in the developmental process, you'll develop that player for a number of years, and then in free agency, they throw the deuces, and you won't see them again. As much as development is important, relationship is just as important. And this is the beauty of us being able to be guides and sages for all of them. And every great story, every great hero, it has a guide, it has a sage. If you're a Lord of the Rings fan, this is Gandalf to Frodo. If you are a Star Wars fan, this is Yoda to Luke Skywalker. My personal favorite movie of all time is actually Friday, and you can see this in Friday as well. So you've got Pops. I call him Pops because he's Pops from the Wayans brothers. That the show, and I don't know what his name is actually in Friday. I just always call him Pops. And you got Craig. And if you're not familiar with the story, if you haven't seen the movie, Craig and his buddy Smokey, they are in some trouble with a drug dealer. They owe him $200, and if they don't pay him $200, he's going to set out to kill them. So the whole movie is about them trying to figure out how to. It sounds crazy, how to find $200. I mean, I always think about that. It's like you can go panhandle and probably get that, or if you really told your parents, like, "Hey, we need to get $200 or we're going to die," they'd probably do it. But it's a movie, so I understand. So after falling short of a number of plans, Craig finally just decides, you know what? I'm just going to play this game with the drug dealer who's Big Worm, and I'm going to go play his game. So what he does, he goes into his room, goes into his dresser drawer, pulls out a gun, and at the same time he pulls out a gun, his dad, Pops, walks in, and he turns around, and Pops says, you might know it, he says, "What's that for?" And Craig says, "Protection." And Pops goes, "Protection from what? Like, me and your mom wouldn't have moved into this neighborhood if we knew you needed a damn gun to walk down the street." And they have this back and forth, and then all of a sudden, Pops enters sage mode, and he says, "Put the gun down, son." And what he does is he says, "Put your fist up." And even before that, he's asking Craig, he's like, "You think you're a man? You think you're a man with that gun in your hands, don't you?" And Craig says, "I'm a man without it." And so he's got his dukes up. And that's when Pop says, "Now you're a man." See, in that story with Yoda, with Gandalf, what they are doing is they are giving the heroes a better story. This is our job as leaders. It's not our job to be the hero. It's our job to be the guide. As guides, we are casting vision and a better story for these players when they ultimately come into the program or the organization. They come in with one story, but as experts and as guides, we understand it's going to take a whole heck of a lot more than what they're thinking. So we have to be the ones to build a better vision and a better story. So when these players are in the pit, what we're doing to help them get out is 4 different things. And this can be defined as the ladder. So the first thing, what we want to do is we want to build, just like what Craig and his Pops did for him, we want to build vision. Players come in with vision. We want to make that a better vision. A lot of times they already have a North Star, but they need to be reminded of what that North Star is, or that North Star needs a little bit of recalibration. And that's sort of the irony of this whole thing. Vision is what's going to get them into the pit, but vision is what's going to get them out of the pit. This season, and I know I see a few of my Austin staff on the call, so I will not say any names. We had a player this year who, for just kind of keep it real, he's dealing with some toughness issues. And one day he comes in before the game and he goes to our medical staff, he goes to our trainer and says, "Hey, I'm sick. I can't play today." The trainer checks him out. There's no fever. He's got a little bit of a sore throat, runny nose. And the trainer says, "I think you have a cold, but you could probably play today." And this player says, "No, I don't think I'm going to play today." So the trainer calls me. He says, "Hey, so-and-so is sick. He's not going to play today." I'm like, "Oh, is he all right? Is he throwing up a lot?" And he's like, "No, he's not throwing up at all. There's no fever." And I'm like, "So what do you mean he's not playing?" He's like, "Well, he just has a cold." And I'm like, well, what do you mean? He's not going to play? He's like, he said he's not going to play. So what our staff did when they found that out is they rallied around him and they got him to at least go through warmups. By the time I got to the game, I had not spoken with this player yet. So I took him into the medical office, shut the door behind me, and I told him, hey, so-and-so player, how are you feeling? And he's like, I'm sick. I don't think I can play today. And I said, you know what, so-and-so player? I said, you're an Austin Spur right now. You are not a San Antonio Spur yet. So in San Antonio, when we're scouting players, what are the three main things that we look for in our players that we want for this program, in this organization? And he says, we want high character individuals, we want hardworking individuals, and we want tough players. Now, I couldn't have drawn it up better because he basically gave me a lob right there. So I said, exactly. We want hardworking, high character, tough players. Right now, you're in Austin, but your vision is to be a San Antonio Spur. So of those three areas, what's the one area that you can take a major step forward in? Now, this player, he was already keen to what I was getting at. He stops me and actually says, can I ask you a question? I said, sure. He said, do I even have a choice? I'm probably sure I have to play today. And I said, you know what, so-and-so player? No, you don't have to play. I'm not going to force you to play. But you're the one that casts the vision. You're the one that knows what it's going to take to get there. And right now, you have an opportunity to take a step in your toughness, in your area of toughness. In that moment, and it's not just me because our staff did an incredible job with this individual player all season long, all we were redoing was reminding him of the vision that he set out for. We also have the same vision, of course, but a lot of times when our players are in the pit, when your players are in the pit, we as leaders, we have to be the ones that are holding their vision for them. Because like I said earlier, the pit can be very lonely, it can be regret-filled, and it can be disorienting. A lot of players feel very lost in the pit. So that's the first thing. The second thing is time. Now, time, it's a pretty simple thing. And while I'm doing this, let me admit some people in. The second thing is time. As players are in the pit, we as leaders, we have to be extremely patient with them because nobody gets out of the pit at the same rate or at the same speed. Now, this is very obvious, but a lot of times it takes a lot of reminders for us. We need to be highly empathetic, which means putting ourselves in that player's shoes, understanding that we ourselves have gone through pit stages of our developmental journey and whatever it is, again, riding a bike, playing basketball, being a coach. We need to be very good listeners. We cannot assume things. We can't do what I call gap filling, which is if I don't have constant communication or maybe over communication with this player, I'm going to be tempted to fill in the gaps for them. And I'm going to be leading them and guiding them on a version of themselves that has more to do with me than it does to do with them. And finally, we have to have the ultimate belief in that player that they can be the absolute best versions of themselves while they're struggling with their own ego, with their own stories in the pit. Just like we hold vision for them when they're in the pit, we also have to hold their potential. We have to let them know, hey, you're a lot better than this and you're going to get through this. Just think about the developmental journey right now. You're in the pit stage. You're going to get out of this. It's just going to take time. The third thing, another obvious one, are resources. So this is easy. This is as much gym access as you can give your players if you're coaching players, tutors if they're on campus and they're falling behind in their classrooms, they're struggling trying to juggle basketball and academics, which is a very common thing amongst most players. Meal plans, helping them eat right, getting them nutritionists. Today more than ever, players need to have access to mental health resources. Those we are seeing more and more that's becoming a very, very big thing. And even the NBA is trying to implement something a little bit more long-term for that. It doesn't have to just be an NBA thing. That should be starting at the junior high level to high school to college. These are all resources that we as leaders have to leverage for their ultimate success and their flourishing. And then finally, if I can fit it in here, to get out of the pit, these players, any of the heroes, anybody on their developmental journey needs strong community. I love the African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, take others with you. Now, this perfectly encapsulates what it means to be a team. Teammates, and another important part of this, teammates are there to help carry each other's burdens. When one of their troops, one of their men are falling into the pit, we as coaches and as leaders have to rely on their teammates to do a lot of the holding of the burden and the scariness and the loneliness and the regret, just like we're trying to do as leaders and as coaches. We have to be able to trust our own team to back these players as they're in this scary pit stage of their development. Teammates also need to accept these players exactly where they're at, yet continue to challenge them beyond where they're at to get them to go further and farther on their developmental journey. Because like I said, one of the temptations is to become stagnant. When players are in the pit, they become stagnant and they don't want to move. If you rally them, not just with what you're saying, because coach's words only go so far, management's words only go so far, but when a teammate says something to you and challenges you, that just seems to have a whole heck of a lot more effect than it does for coaches and management. And I would imagine some of you have experienced that. So they have to be able to accept the player first where they are, get challenged, and to go beyond where they're at. And finally, if you can get your team to rally around this player outside of a basketball context, if you find that their friendship is evolving off the court, then you really do have something special in the mix. In San Antonio, what we try to do is we try to implement team dinners as much as possible, just kind of breaking bread with each other, sharing stories, just kind of kicking it and whatnot, and not always thinking about basketball. That's something that Coach Popovich is very big on, that life is so much bigger than just basketball. So, a lot there with the pit, but after a whole heck of a lot of vision, time, resources, community, and a lot of pounding the rock, this is when you start to see players enter into this third stage. And this is where it really gets fun for players. And this is conscious competence. Or this is sober competence. These players have finally learned something. This stage can be summed up by this. You now know what you know. You have a very sober look at yourself. You have a sober look at your vision. You have a sober look at your pathway. And it's taken a whole lot of the vision, time, resources, and community, and us as leaders to help these players really, really see that, to not get bogged down, to understand that it's going to be okay. And the more that you can actually pound the rock, one day that whole boulder is actually going to crack and you start to enter stage 3. Now, this is a beautiful stage 2. Beautiful stage also, not 2 the number. It's a great stage because this is where coaches and leaders and guides, this is where you actually can start giving these players that are entering this stage more and more leadership responsibilities. Now, I say that because there is a temptation of D3, stage 3 conscious competence. The temptation is when you finally start to see some success, when you finally start to see the fruit of your labor, what you want to do is you want to quickly hurry to get to the vision. Now you want to put on the jets and you want to get there as quick as possible. And that's the same sort of temptation that is in stage 1 and stage 2. The way we battle this is we start to give players leadership responsibilities. See, here's the thing when it comes down to leadership and it comes down to growing and development. We learn 10% of what we read. We learn 30% of what we hear, but we learn 90% of what we teach to others. By giving players that are entering stage 3 and are in stage 3 more and more leadership opportunities, what we're doing is we're cultivating a process of leadership. It's sort of like a leadership pipeline. You see, we always should have somebody ahead. This is the sages. These are the guys. These are Pops, Yoda, Gandalf. You should always have somebody ahead of you in your field. You should always have a teammate beside you, because when you're entering some rough patches and you're learning something new, there's nothing better than having somebody right there in the foxhole with you. I'm struggling with this. Can you help me out? There's the dialogue. There's the discussion. There's the reflection. You need all of that to help grow each player in that moment as best as possible. So ahead, beside, and finally, you need somebody behind. And this is where that 90% of what you teach to others, you are relearning. You see, by continuously feeding what you've been given to others, what you're doing is you're helping out the next wave of players, but you're also ingraining more and more of what you've been learning into your own psyche. This is how our brains work. We love familiarity. We love patterns. So the more you do something, the more those neurological pathways in your brain actually become deeper and deeper and deeper. And this is what happens when you see some of the best. They've just constantly gone over that pathway over and over and over again. And when you start to do that, and you start to see a big time fruit, you enter the final stage, and this should be obvious by now. This is D4. And this is characterized as unconscious competence. Or my favorite word of this whole thing, and you see it in your players, the best of them, this is when they're in ultimate flow. Everything is like second nature to them. They don't have to think about what they're doing anymore. The vision that got them in the pit and what they had to learn, and they're fumbling around the dark trying to master, now that is like second nature, and they're no longer thinking about it. This is the best teams in college basketball. You usually see this a lot with your seniors. Sometimes you'll see it with some of these freshmen and sophomores because they're just phenoms and whatnot. In the basketball realm, doesn't necessarily mean they're phenoms in leadership or as teammates, but definitely in basketball. This is where you see players become in the zone. This is where we as coaches and leaders, we can completely take our hands off because we trust that that player is now taking ownership of their own developmental journey. See, it was our job in the pit stage in D2, in conscious incompetence, to really be hands-on, to nurture them, to put relationship around them, to really guide them and drive them to where we wanted to go. But it's in this stage, D4, where you have to take your hands off because that next wave of players coming, and you don't have the attention to be overcoaching the D4s, to be overleading the D4s. Now you have more coming up the pipeline, and you have to turn your attention back to the pit because what's going to happen is this whole cycle is going to start over and over again. It's going to happen at the macro level for team, and it's going to happen at the micro level. Player is each summer, he's going to learn something new. He's going to try and get better and master something else. And ultimately, they're going to fall into the pit a little bit with whatever it is, whether it's changing your shot, whether it's being tasked with more leadership, whether it's school and you're trying. Some of these players are trying to get the best grade they can possibly get. This is a great stage for some of your leaders and where you want to see your captains at because they're able to manage their course loads, they're able to manage coaching expectations, and they're very consistent with their production on the court. Coaches and leaders should have the ultimate trust in these players right here. And this is kind of where I want to end and what I think is the beautiful thing about, the Spurs. This year was a very, very tough year. I think this year as a season as a whole, we entered this new pit stage. But prior to that, past 20 so odd years, we had a whole heck of a lot of players in D4. And they're obvious. The Tim Duncans, the Ginobili's, the Tony Parkers, Kawhi before he was traded. And we had an ultimate sage in Coach Popovich. So from my journey here now in managing, I am able to see my own developmental journey within this square. And it is my hope, as I mentioned before, that you'll be able to see your journey as coaches, your players' journeys. You can use this as a map, or you can use this as a diagnostic to help players understand exactly where they're at. Let them know that if you're in the pit, you're not alone. It's not atypical. This is all part of the process. It's all seasonal. You got fall, winter, spring, and summer. And that's the better way to start thinking about time. So